This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
So in about 2006, the Fractal Audio Axefx Standard came out and the Axefx Ultra, which had double the power of the Standard. And this was notable because it was, I think, about the most expensive modeler that had ever been created, and created essentially single-handedly this market of effects modelers that were very expensive but also getting free updates over time. I think it would go on until about 2011 that the Axefx Standard and Ultra were still being updated, and then they were superseded, and of course we now know that the Fractal Audio family most up to date is like the FM3, the FM9 and the Axefx 3. Beneath that there was Axefx 2 and various generations, and the Fractal Audio Ax8, which was their first kind of floorboard thing. Since the arrival of Fractal, what have we seen? We saw the Kemper come out, which was kind of a different take on it, a very well received different take on it, and there's kind of the two main kind of food groups within the modelling world of the high-end stuff. I think the most well received on the touring circuit and stuff like that. It's either a Kemper or a Fractal Audio device. Now, Kemper has the advantage of being actually distributed in stores and stuff. Fractal has stayed relatively kind of, what's the word, kind of grassrootsy you're buying from either Fractal themselves or G66 in the UK and Europe. Like, they don't have a space within normal kind of retail, and I think that maybe hurts them in some ways, but also manages to work for them in others. As well, we saw Line 6 really pick up their stuff and make improvements on what had gone before. And what happened was, if you look at interviews with Ben Adrian at Line 6, he explicitly states that the Line 6 Helix, the market for it wouldn't have existed if it were not for the Axe effects that kind of showed that there was an appetite for users of this kind of gear. If you're, I don't know if you were active at the time on forums, so Misha Mansour was particularly quite a key kind of guy on the forums that was active, writing music from periphery, obviously. Before the Fractal Axe effects, he actually used the Pod XT, and I think he may have even used the Pod HD 500. I can't remember exactly on that, but he moved over to Axe effects at some point and stopped using the Line 6 gear. And you could, he kind of did regular kind of mixes and showed stuff about him, would talk about why he liked the Axe effects, and obviously then went on to become quite a big deal. This was kind of in the bulb days. So yeah, the Helix, I think, was a real improvement on previous Line 6 gear, not just in terms of, using later technology, but also they really revolutionized the UI of modelers, and that's not something that the Kemper and Axe effects 2 had at the time. The Helix was the first, I think, proper big kind of adult or modern day looking color screen, and with a bunch of really cool features. The Axe effects 2 was still on that kind of green screen, and the Kemper, obviously you know what that Kemper UI looks like. I think that Helix is the thing that I really used often, but there's no way that you could say, especially if the people that are developing Helix themselves have said, without Fractal we wouldn't have been able to release a product that was this expensive and that required this much investment from the user. So I think, as much as I'm a fan of Line 6 and what they do these days, I still have to tip my hat to Fractal, because they kind of started it in a lot of ways. Now, since then, there's been a new kid on the block that kind of said a lot of things. The Quad Cortex came along and was the most powerful floor modeler in the world for a while. I don't know if they still hold that title. The FM9, I think, probably butts heads against that really quite well. And then the question remains, is Fractal still the kind of king of modeling? Now, there's one area that I think for some people might mean that it would not be, and another area that I think that they could maybe over time continue along this same path that they've been on, and which would, I think, give them at least a period longer where they're, I think, probably still at the top. So one area that the Fractal Axe effects can do, but the FM9 and FM3 cannot, is this idea of creating a tone match. Now, this is not super easy to achieve, and also I think Cliff has kind of lost interest in it because he has more faith in his kind of modeling approach that you wouldn't really need to do this tone matching stuff. If you look on the wiki, he said something more or less to this effect, where if you've got the amp and you've got the model, if you set the knobs in the same place, you're going to get pretty much super close. And so the tone matching, profiling, capturing thing is not so much interesting for him. And I think that makes sense in the context where you've got in the Fractal such a mature kind of library of amps that, to be honest, you don't really need to capture most things. If you can think of an amp, most of the time they've got something close to it in the Fractal Audio ecosystem. So say you wanted a Vox AC15, AC30, say you wanted a Fender Super Reverb, say you wanted a Fender Vibroverb, say you wanted a Mesa Boogie Mark IV, a Mesa Boogie Mark II, a Mesa Boogie Subway Rocket, countless Dumbles, say you wanted a Trainwreck, say you wanted a Supro, say you wanted a Splawn. They've got so much in there, 5150s coming out of their caboozles. There's such a wide variety of amps within there that you can really, I think, nail pretty much any tone with the Fractal audio stuff. And I think most people would have it in mind that some of their amp modeling stuff, oversampling it 8 times or 16 times, kind of the best that is in the industry and the best kind of quality in a lot of ways, and super accurate. And you can do your own test on that to see. I think I tested the Orange Rocker Verb and the Lone Star and found them to be really quite accurate, you know, such that you could A/B them, and probably I could trick myself most of the time. So do you really need a profiling or capturing approach if you've got enough amps in there that you probably wouldn't need to add amps, because they got so many more than any other device that make them? So that's kind of one area that maybe they don't have the market cornered on, which potentially Neural are making a bit of headway in. And of course, Kemper, that's been their main bread and butter for ages. Now, I think the Quad Cortex is more a competitor to the Kemper than it is to Fractal, because not only does the Fractal have, you know, over 300 amp models, but they also got an incredibly extensive effects library, and people do use the Fractal stuff for effects only. You know, Steve Vai, The Edge, Petrucci, a few people like this, or quite a lot of people like this. So I think, again, at the time that the Strymon Big Sky and Timeline came out, sort of around 10 years ago, I think people then had it in mind that it was way better than anything else on the market, and I think that probably was the case at the time. I think now Fractal particularly have made real strides in this area, and they've gone beyond what Strymon could do in there. For example, you know, if you were a fan of the Keeley Halo pedal, the Aurora I was using there, which is kind of Cliff's take on what the Keeley Halo does, and I think he'd spoken with Robert Keeley or something like that and kind of created the model of it. They came out, I think, in about 2019, 2020 with their own kind of take on the cloud reverbs, which was a main kind of thing from the Big Sky. You've got 10 tap, quad tap delays in there, but also so much granularity to all aspects of this. And again, this is one of the things that doesn't matter that you don't have profiling and capturing, because you can go in and you can make real kind of tweaks to the components and stuff. So, you know, if you knew, for example, that Andy Timmons uses EL34s in his Lone Star, you can go in and switch out the power amp tubes. You can go in and change the cathode bias. You can do loads of crazy tweaking. And that's kind of what this Fractal stuff is about. If you want to go in really deep and edit some of this stuff, you kind of can. That's not what I do most of the time. Most of the time I'm kind of doing surface level tweaking, and I'm still super happy with the results. But effects, easily, I think, top of the market. The one area that I think Line 6 kind of has them beat a little bit is in terms of creative effects that are a little bit out of left field, left to center, however you want to say it. Some of the things that are a little bit kind of Chase Bliss inspired. So if you're thinking about blocks that can do kind of weird things like the tessellator or the shuffling looper, you've got these strange kind of effects that are very much just designed from the ground up, not necessarily based on anything in reality, just coming from the minds of people that used to work at Digitech and Lexicon and people like that. So I think that's one area, but aside from that, in terms of drives, modulation, delays, reverbs, all of that stuff, and I guess the other area may be some of the reverbs in the Helix now, the Dynamic series, I really like. Again, they were made by a chap called Norm from Lexicon Digitech, and yeah, the Dynamic Plate and Dynamic Hall, I think those really sound really great, but there's no question that some of the reverbs in Fractal, and probably most of them, sound amazing, especially the cloud ones, and especially the kind of shimmers and stuff like that. There's so much in it that I think is top tier. The Plex Verb, the quad tap, 10 tap delays, you've got so much in there, as well as the most flexible routing that there is going. Now, the Quad Cortex kind of copied more or less the grid of the Helix, and for that reason you have some of the same limitations as the Helix, in that you can't kind of go backwards on yourself. The signal only really goes one way. What's interesting about Fractal is that you can chuck things patch them across the grid and stuff like that. It's way more flexible because it's kind of, you draw your own connections. And so in terms of the most flexible, I think, again, Fractal probably wins for that as well. The one area that I think they don't necessarily win is in terms of making it super usable. Now, they have made big strides on this, I think. If I did use an Axe 8 for a bit, I find the FM3 with the biggest screen and the Axefx 3 and the FM9 way easier to use than the predecessors from Fractal. So I think they have taken it on board that there was kind of improvements that could be made in terms of user interface. The desktop editors, though, are a bit of a savior for a lot of people. I don't use them, but a lot of people really like those, and that's something that the Neural doesn't have yet. So I think that might be one area where Fractal could make yet still improvements and work on making things that are possibly slightly easier to get to the end result with. But once you start using it a bit, I think you find, you know, because I'm not a daily user of Fractal, it can sometimes be a little bit confusing for me, but I'm sure if I was using it more often, that it would start to become more clear. And so I'm relatively okay at using the hardware, but I think if I was using it every day, I could get better. But that is the one area that there is a bit of a learning curve with Fractal. And so that might be one point maybe where some other modelers like the Helix or the Quad Cortex have a little bit of a easier to use user experience. But in terms of tones, I think Fractal probably, for me, I think I'm most happy about the widest range of tones that are available in there. In terms of effects, again, I think it rivals even the best kind of effects manufacturers out there, Strymon, Empress, all of these guys. I think Keeley, the Fractal stuff can do pretty much anything you throw at it in terms of the breadth of effects and usability of them, and the tweakability of the whole unit as well. I think it's king for that as well. It doesn't have profiling so much or capturing, although on the Axefx you can do tone match, but I don't think you necessarily need it because you have so many amp models. I was using in the intro there the Dumble Robin Ford, and then I kicked on a Sir Riot pedal. The drive selection now is really, really good as well. And again, same sort of thing with all of these things. You can get in and switch out at a component level. So if you wanted to change the diodes in your tube screamer, you can do that in Fractal. Whether you need to or not is up to you, but to be able to do it is a thing that some of these other devices, you just can't do it. So I think for me, although I don't use it all the time, I still do think that Fractal still is the pinnacle of modeling, in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have you tried one? If you've ever been disappointed by some of these units, again, let people know your thoughts in the comments if you'd like to. If you use them and love them, go ahead and share that thought as well. Anything that you think people need to know about in the Fractal unit, including me, your favorite models in there. So yeah, that Robin Ford Dumble is amazing. The Sir Riot, really cool. And the Aurora delay based on the Keeley Halo, I think is really worth a lot of attention. Thank you for stopping by. If you want that tone, it'll be on Gumroad. I'll catch you in another video soon. Cheers.